So this here is a Canon R8, and it is a bit of a quirky camera. And these are several reasons why this camera might not be for you. The battery life, it's not really portable because of the fact that I would have to add something for gyro data stabilization. The shadows are noisy, but that could be fixed with noise reduction. I just wish Canon would give us the option to not have the viewfinder. Before I transfer, I'm looking at the files, and some of these files, they're showing up as 0 kilobytes. Digital IS is really wonky. Like, why would you do that? The battery life. Now, I've got 2 LPE12 batteries because of my experience and ownership of the Canon EOS M6 Mark II. And I figured, hey, this might actually be a good addition. Granted, it uses the same exact battery. Now, the thing is with the Canon, I know if I have 2 batteries, any outing that I have, if I go to, whether it's, hanging out with the family or going to an event or something like that, or I want to just, just shoot something for fun, I know 2 batteries are more than enough with the Canon EOS M6 Mark II for me to capture everything that I want. The 2 batteries together will last me about an hour and a half, about 90 minutes or so. Together, it's about 45 minutes per battery on the M6 Mark II. However, here's a weird thing about the way that the battery operates inside the R8. First battery, when it's running, depending on what mode you're in, if you're using something that uses a lot of power, I suppose, whether it's 4K 60 versus 4K 24. The Canon, I feel like as the Canon gets warm, that is also affecting the efficacy of the battery life. I don't know why that is. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that the warmer an electronic device is, the worse the battery life tends to be. That's just my assumption. And so on a single battery, I've managed to get maybe the first run, it'll be about 30 some minutes, maybe 36 minutes or so before the battery just completely runs out. And then when I put the second battery in, it's less than that, although both are fully charged. I don't know why that is. Another possibility is that because these batteries are a little bit older, the batteries through time tend to also hold their charge less. So that could be another reason. And that's my assumption because I've had these 2 batteries for a long time, for several years now. And so versus the fresh battery that's coming in that came with the Canon R8, maybe that's why this battery tends to last over 30 minutes, whereas these other batteries that I have, they're not lasting as long, but I don't see that much of a problem on the M6 Mark II. So that's the one thing that kind of bothers me, is the sense that like compared to like a Sony a7C, right? Or even the ZV-E10, right? The ZV-E10 uses these little batteries, right? And it will last me at least about an hour or so. On the A7C, the Z batteries, they'll last me about 2+ hours, right? Which is great. Whereas I can't even get a solid hour from the battery on the Canon R8. Now, one of the perks of the R8 is that it's nice and portable. But the moment you start adding like a V-mount battery or something like that to extend, or even a battery pack to extend the life of it, you're killing the ability for it to be portable. Now that brings me to my other point with relation to portability. By itself, just like this, yeah, it's pretty small. It's almost comparable to the M6 Mark II. But the moment I put anything more than a pancake lens on it, couple that with my desire to get gyro data stabilization mounting a Insta360, it's suddenly not portable. And add on top of that my desire to have maybe like a top handle, right? It's no longer something that's bag worthy. I have to break it all down, put it in my bag. And even yesterday, I remember I went to jiu-jitsu class, and I had packed the camera with the desire to, capture some footage. But the moment we got into sparring, I was just like, nah, it's, I guess the barrier or the friction for me to go to my bag, pull everything out, put it all together just became an issue of like, although in reality it is just a couple minutes, it's just one of those things that just prevented me from stepping off the mat, go to my bag, put it all together, and then come back on the mat. Whereas normally if I have a smaller camera like the ZV-E10, everything's already put together, right? I just pull it out and I'm ready to go. I don't usually take the EOS M6 Mark II to jiu-jitsu because I think it's for that reason alone, which brings me on to the fact that the thing that I really enjoy and appreciate about cameras from Sony, whether it's a ZV-E10, this is a tiny camera, but the thing that makes it even more portable, like, mind you, I've got a cage on this thing, right? And the A7C with a cage is similar in size as well. The thing though that really makes it worthwhile is the fact that it captures gyro data internally. The moment I mount an Insta360 on it, right, it is no longer portable, right? It tends to be kind of wide, or if I point it up on top, like with any kind of mount that goes on the hot shoe, it becomes really, really high. So it's just one of those things where I want the gyro data off of this so I can stabilize this, whereas I already got everything here. My only issue is that on here, which is the Sony, I don't have the ability to turn off noise reduction. Whereas on Canon, I can turn off noise reduction. I much prefer the image coming out of this when it's not noise reduced in situations that are high ISO, which tends to be the case when I am gyro stabilizing, because I need to run that shutter speed significantly higher than 180 degrees. So typically, whenever it comes to running the shutter speed, you might be 1 over, say, 50 or 1 over 60 to get close to the 180 degree shutter. Whereas if you're running any kind of gyro stabilization or IS enhanced, like digital IS enhanced, doesn't matter what camera manufacturer you have, you need to eliminate that motion blur so that you can get proper stabilization, you don't get these artifacts. And so I typically run my shutter speed up to like 1 over 160, 1 over 200, maybe even 1 over 250. And so as a result, the ISO also has to be run pretty high. Now on a full frame, that's not so bad, but that kind of brings me to my other issue with relation to Canon, is that for some reason, and I guess this is the situation with almost all Canon cameras, Canon does not seem to do very well with noise and information in shadows. So normally you wouldn't notice that because Canon tends to crush its blacks. Normally in the standard picture profiles, the shadows will all be much darker than, say, on a Sony. In fact, on Sony, they have enough dynamic range for you to maintain a lot of that information that's in the shadows. Now, one of the perks is that with the Canon on C-Log 3, you get a lot more of that latitude, a lot more of that information between the highlights and the shadows. Now, the good thing about the highlights is that you've got more information there, but with the shadows, even the areas that normally wouldn't be crushed suddenly are a lot more noisy. Now, I can run a passive neat video noise reduction to reduce that, but that just adds time to the export and rendering. So whereas I didn't seem to have to do that with something like a Sony A7C, which is several years older. So that's kind of it with relation to its trade-offs, right? You get, I guess, more dynamic range, but the shadows have to be a little bit noisier. You get a much cleaner image. You get significantly higher ISOs that are relatively clean. You could turn off the noise reduction, put a neat video noise reduction pass on it, but then you're just adding more time. So I guess it's one of those things where, what are you looking for? In my case, I want to reduce the amount of time that I'm spending with relation to the image that's coming out of a camera. Part of that is involving rigging it up, shooting, breaking it down, transferring, the editing, and the rendering. Now, some of that, if I can eliminate the rigging up and tearing down, if I can eliminate the rendering time, that would be a win. And I feel like with the Canon R8, I'm not going to be able to do that. So the other thing is I just wish Canon would give us the option to not have the viewfinder. For people, like, this is a camera that seemingly intended for video. There's no mechanical shutter. There's a lot of great video options. The image coming out of here generally is really, really good. So why? Like, one of the reasons I got the EOS M6 Mark II is the fact that it did not have a viewfinder. And if you so desperately needed one, you can get an electronic viewfinder accessory attachment for those who want one. and then, you know, you got it. One of the reasons I like the Sony ZV-E10, the A7C, and the whole FX line of cameras, the FX3, FX30, and one of the reasons I'm also seriously considering the FX30 is the fact that it doesn't have a viewfinder on there unnecessarily, especially for people who are focused on video. Even myself, with relation to photos, I'm not this guy, right? I am this guy, right? Now, photo purists might consider that blasphemous, where like, hey, you should use the viewfinder, get in the zone and all that for stability. Like, again, that I understand that from a perspective of photography, but for video, I want to be out here. I want to be over here. I don't want to be over here. So the whole point, I just feel like this camera would have been far more appealing with relation to its size and even pricing. They could even reduce the price of this to probably close to $1,000, if not under $1,000, if they just knock off the viewfinder, because the viewfinder is not a cheap tech from what I understand, or at least the markup is not cheap with relation to the entire camera makeup. Now, I get that what they're trying to do is they're trying to recycle or continue or minimize the friction from the production side, because this is essentially an EOS RP body. And so they probably didn't have to change much from the external manufacturing side. And that's why there's an EVF here. But then that brings me back to the Canon EOS RP. It's like, knock that EVF out. All right. And so, but then again, I understand the EOS RP was intended to be a good photo camera, a poor video camera. But then here you have a pretty decent video camera. And so, yeah, I guess that's just my issue with relation. Maybe the viewfinder is not a problem for you. One last quirk, which has to do with the files, right? So I've never had a problem taking the SD card out of this thing, right? And bringing that into my computer, and the files are just fine. For whatever reason, it's with this camera specifically, which is, for whatever reason, I will see some of these files, they're there, I copy them over, and they're seemingly not playable, right? I'm like, okay, maybe something happened during the transfer and it just got interrupted. So I plug this in directly via USB-C, like this is a SSD card. Now, before I transfer, I'm looking at the files, and some of these files, they're showing up as 0 kilobytes. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is 30 minutes of continuous video. How is it 0, right? So then I figured, okay, let me go ahead and use Canon standard software, which is the Canon EOS Utility app. Not the EOS Web Utility, which you use for web streaming, but simply the Canon EOS Utility app. You enable EOS Utility through the menu. You plug it in via the USB-C. Computer recognizes it, and then you transfer the files over that way. Totally fine, totally reliable. I don't know what that is about. I don't know why that's happening. A little quirk here. Well, I forgot to mention one more thing. What this goes hand in hand with the image stabilization. One of the things I was hoping for was that the digital IS enhanced was actually going to be good, and it's not. In fact, it's even more quirky when you zoom into somebody. And if somebody's moving their head as people normally do, right? When they're talking and expressing themselves, the camera tries to like do this weird thing where it's following the face when I'm zoomed in. Camera will try to stabilize for the movement of the face, like I don't know why, as opposed to the movement of the body. So as you do this, the whole screen moves up and down, left, right, unless you zoom out to like a medium shot. But if I zoom in to something like an extreme close-up, then it just starts following the face, which is so weird and quirky. This would probably be a good purchase used maybe a year or so down the line, right? Brand new, I'm not so sure. Again, the battery life, it's not really portable because of the fact that I would have to add something for gyro data stabilization. The shadows are noisy, but that could be fixed with noise reduction in terms of post in neat video, not internally. And knock off the viewfinder so you can make it cheaper, but maybe that's something that they'll do in the future. Before I transfer, I'm looking at the files, and some of these files, they're showing up as 0 kilobytes. Digital IS is really wonky. Like, why would you do that? I guess all of these things added together, probably not gonna stick to this camera. This is a rental anyway, so I'm gonna be sending this back today. One of the things though that I am considering maybe is renting an R6 Mark II to see if that thing has resolve the issues like the battery. I mean, it's got a bigger battery, so I would assume that is the case. It's not going to have any overheating. When compared to this one is rigged up, I don't believe it will be much of a difference with relation to size. So I'm going to check to see if that works out. The other thing I'm also interested in is the R5C, but that's a discussion for another day. Anyway, that's it. This is my 1 week review of the Canon EOS R8, sending it back. Maybe it's a purchase for some time down in the future, but not brand new. I hope you found value in this video. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. I will see you soon.